talk rather than a read lecture. Language learning beyond the classroom and beyond the curriculum. I remember when I was an undergraduate, I was quite institutionalized. I thought if I went to class and did what my teachers told me, I was doing just great. Well, later life experience has told me that that wasn't quite the case, and I'm sure it's probably not the case with many of you either. We can all do more. And what I want to talk about here is why a typical college student would consider and would want to learn another language, and how that might be done beyond the ordinary classroom experience. Now, we have good French and Spanish teachers here. Madame Hoyt is here, and Dr. Marquez teach French and Spanish. Their courses are 2-year-long courses. That would be equivalent to about 4 or 5 years of high school, counting 1 semester of foreign language in college are worth 1 year of high school study. But suppose you've done all the French you want, or suppose you've done all the Spanish you want, and you'd like to do something else. Maybe you'd like to do Russian, or Chinese, or Korean, or Japanese, or Arabic. What do you do about that if you're Tuskegee? You can't find a formal course. So that's what we want to talk about here. Why you would want to do that, and how you might go about it. First, let's contextualize language learning within some very interesting facts. There are about 7,000 languages in the world, and most of us, if we've studied, we might know 2 or 3 of them, but 7,000 is quite a few languages. 2/3 of the world's population speak one of these 12 languages that I'm going to show you now. If my clicker works, there they go. You can see that the numbers are given in terms of millions. Arabic, 670 million. Chinese, 1.39 billion. Spanish, 389 million. Hindi, Urdu, 588 million. Bengali, 250 million. English, 527 million. And then we have some of the smaller populations. They're still huge. We have Portuguese, 193 million. Italian, 67 million. German, 132 million. Japanese, 123 million. French, 118 million. And Russian, 254 million. So these languages are the major languages that 2/3 of the world's population speaks one of these 12. So if you start working on 1 or 2 of these in addition to English, you're going to be pretty well connected. And about half of the world's population is multilingual. I mean speaking more than 1, maybe 2 or 3. Most of us, not in this room because I see a lot of polyglots in this room, but most of us who grew up in the United States are monolingual. That is, we only speak 1 language. We may have picked up a little in high school. Maybe we picked up a little French in the college French course or a little Spanish, but we really don't converse fluently. And this is quite unlike many, many more people in the world. About half of the world's population is going to be communicating every day in far more than 1 language. I remember when I was traveling in Europe, I was in Belgium, and I was at a small hotel. The gal who was at the desk, she was quite beautiful, and I was so struck by her. She answered the phone in about 4 languages, and I wanted to have something to say to her. And I said, how many languages do you speak? She said, 5 rather well, and several others. And I felt about this high. Europeans are quite fluid, and Africans too, by the way. There are faculty members here who come from West Africa. People speak 3 and 4 languages in West African countries. Commonly, ask Dr. Indy how many he speaks. It's quite impressive against us Americans who basically stick with 1. Now, what about studying languages? Let's get focused on a few figures there. What percentage of college students in the United States would you think study a foreign language? Make a guess. It's not big business. How many do you think? What percentage? 10, 20, 30? 5 is closer. It's 7%. 7% of American college students study a foreign language. Now let's figure out about Tuskegee, all right? We have about 100 in French and 100 in Spanish, crudely. What's our student population? Who knows the figure?
Just say
3,000. Let's say 3,000. Who can do some math? Who's got a calculator? 3,000. So it'd be 200 over 3,000. What's that going to give us? Approximately 6%?
7%.
6 to 7%. So we're right in line with the majority of colleges in the United States. But this isn't a figure to brag about, right? This is not one of the good figures we want to talk about. Right? It's not a whole lot. So language learning in American colleges and universities is simply not big business. And this brings us to the question, why would a U.S. college student, an aspiring professional, or just a curious individual really want to learn another language? What's the point? And I'm going to answer this question in 2 ways. One way I know an awful lot about because I was a foreign language major in college, and I spent 4 years, and then I spent many more years in graduate school pursuing the intellectual and cultural side of it. But there's another side of it as well. I call that the pragmatic side. That's about jobs and money and business communication. So we can kind of break down good motivations for language along those 2 lines. So intellectual reasons, by the way, I found this article. It's an amazing article. It's published by the Higher Education Academy of the United Kingdom, the Languages and Linguistics and Area Studies branch. It says 700 reasons for studying a foreign language. Is 46 pages long with a huge bibliography. So this was done to establish empirically the reasons that people who study language give for wanting to learn a language. By the way, the overall conclusion wasn't money or business. It was language learning is personally enjoyable. That was the final conclusion of this huge document. But anyway, let's think about some of the intellectual reasons that a college student might want to engage in for studying language. The aesthetics of style, being able to read a poem in French, or read a poem in Latin, or read a poem in Sanskrit, and you are actually able to see the way the author laid the words down in that original format. And connect the sound to sense. That's a good reason. Critical thinking. As you contrast your native language to the language you're learning, you get insights into how your language works as well as how the language you're learning works. That's one of the reasons it's always given for the study of Latin. Latin helps people learn how English works, and it surely does. Contrastive analysis is a good tool for that. General cultural information, right? Language carries culture. You want to study about the history of a people or the way people think, their philosophy, their religion, their daily life. The language encodes all that. It makes it interesting. Intercultural competence. If you're studying a modern language, you can communicate with people in their mother tongue. That gives you an emotional edge in connecting with individuals from foreign cultures. Linguistic science. That's a more scientific approach to the study of language. Phonetics is part of that. The historical grammar, the more technical side of language. Reading literature in the foreign language, of course. If you'd like to read stories in Spanish rather than reading them in translation, well, you've got that ability. Personal and social development. When you develop personally and socially as you interact with people who belong to cultures other than yours, you widen your viewpoint. You get a more cosmopolitan attitude toward the world. And then study and travel abroad. which is very important, and we're going to have Dr. Collier from the Global Office come talk in a moment about this issue, but it's very interesting. One of my professors in college said, you study and travel abroad because it helps you know who you are at home. Now, I hadn't thought about that. I couldn't quite understand that at the time, but having done a lot of traveling, I have a sense of that now that I didn't when I first heard the statement. But it's something to think about. You go to a foreign country, you observe the way people live, you come back, and it makes you much more aware of how you're living at home and what things might be able to be made better from your previous experience. All right, now I could go on about this topic forever, but I'm not going to. If you are a foreign language major, you spend 4 years of college dwelling on the various intellectual and aesthetic and literary elements of the language you're studying. But I would like to give one concrete example that I think will sort of summarize it all. I'm going to ask a question now. How many of you, not to answer it aloud, how many of you identify yourselves as a member of the Judeo-Christian religious tradition? All right, it would be Jewish or Christian, or even Islamic. It's an Abrahamic religions, right? Would work as well. If you think of yourselves in that respect, think of the languages that the scriptures of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam are written in. Now, abroad, those religions do a little bit better job of teaching the languages, right? Because you have to read if you're going to read the Quran, you have to read it in Arabic. It's not considered very valid in translation, I understand. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong. I know that many Jewish cultural centers teach Hebrew, but most of our Christian churches do not teach Greek, the language of the New Testament. You just don't really think the translations are adequate. Here is one of the Dead Sea Scrolls with a translation into the transcription into modern Hebraic script. You can see that it really is quite different. And to learn to read the manuscript is a separate skill apart from the language itself. Right? You have to learn the letter forms, and that's challenging. So if you start with the Jewish or Christian faith, you're going to work yourself back to ancient Hebrew pretty quickly. There's a Greek text. That's the Bodmer Papyrus, P. Bodmer 75, and what you see up there. Let me see if I can point to that for those folks who see if I can get my pointer up here. Right up here, if I can see it, it's not as is the beginning of the Gospel of John in Arche ein Hologos. You might be able to make that out right there. Okay, that's a papyrus, early papyrus in the 200s AD of the Gospel of John, and you'll notice that the words are not divided and the letters aren't divided. I make a lot of that in some of my classes. Imagine having to read text where there were no word divisions, no sentence divisions, and no letter divisions. And reading was very slow, and only about 10% of the ancient world could do it. Right? But you would get back to that if you're working on the Christian Bible. And if you're working on the background to the Jewish Bible, you're going to run into Babylonian. There it is. That's a tablet from the epic, so-called Epic of Gilgamesh. You'll notice that it's cuneiform. Cuneiform, by the way, is not a language. It's a writing system that writes a number of languages. It's like the alphabet is a writing system that writes a number of languages. It takes quite a number of years to master this because you have to learn the language and you have to learn the writing system. And if you keep pushing back beyond Babylonian, even with the Epic of Gilgamesh, you're going to get to Sumerian, and that's the Sumerian tablet. I took the trouble actually to learn how to read that. Here's the book I used. I didn't get all the way through it, but I got far enough through it to be able to decipher that text. It's quite rewarding. Okay, so that shows you the intellectual side of language learning. Start with your religion. You want to find out the original language of the text of your religion, and you start exploring, and it takes you back through history. Okay, now, but what about a more contemporary topic than just some ancient things? We can go to, if you're interested in Africa, some of you should be interested in Africa because it's your proximate origin. It's, of course, the origin of all of us ultimately, but some of you are more recently from Africa than others of us. And here is a map of all the different languages, not languages, but language families, okay, that inhabit Africa, about 2,000 or 2,100 languages on the continent, right? And you'll see the northern part, that kind of blue, that's all basically Arabic speaking. You know, Arabic is an African language. And then you have these West African languages, the Niger-Congo A group. Some of our folks in here probably speak some of those. And then you have the southern group, and then some of these that I'm not too familiar with. But if you're interested in Ethiopia, for example, look at Amharic. And guess what is behind Amharic? Amharic is descended from a language called Ge'ez. And there are scriptural texts written in this Ge'ez for the Coptic Orthodox, or the Ethiopic Orthodox Church that had the Bible very, very early. Okay, so if you're interested in Africa, there's plenty of play for you and plenty of languages to learn. Right? Plenty of languages to learn. Okay, now we'll make one more foray into just the intellectual, cultural aspect of things. How many of you have heard of something called Gullah? Gullah, all right. Gullah is a Creole language, a mixture of West African languages, Mindi and Vai particularly, and English. And it's a language that's still spoken by very few people on the coastal islands of South Carolina and Georgia. And it's basically an Afro-American language, and it's identified by the Wycliffe Bible translators as a separate language from English. And they've translated the New Testament into Gullah. And if you're interested in Gullah, you can go to YouTube and hear Gullah storytellers telling traditional African-American stories in Gullah. It's quite interesting. You can understand a lot of it. If you wanted to study it very carefully, you'd find that there's some pretty critical differences between Gullah and Standard English, or even between Gullah and African-American English. But it's a real language, and it's right here. And also, if you got interested in American things and wanted to go farther, guess what you could do? You could do Cherokee. Cherokee, an Indian language, or Amerindian language to be more technically correct, developed its own syllabary. A person named Chief Sequoyah, who goes also by the name George Guest, in the 1810s and 20s, came up with a way to write Cherokee. And they have their own language, and it's written down, and you can study it. And if you're an American historian, you're studying certain aspects of American history, you would run into this and you'd have to learn this language. Okay? So, I just want to go back here to see if I can go back. Can I go back? It's not wanting to go back. Okay. So we can have a pretty image. We'll leave that image up there. The cuneiform tablet. All right. So the intellectual, cultural side of things is the sort of thing that you think of as a college major in history, literature, anthropology, or foreign language. Now we're going to move over to the more pragmatic side of things. What sorts of reasons can you think of to learn a language for jobs, money, and self-efficacy? Right? Everybody, all undergraduates that I are interested in money. It wasn't a big thing when I was in college in the 60s. It was all about learn to do your own thing. But now people think about money. and what they can do to earn it. And here's some jobs that can be enhanced quite greatly by bilingual or multilingual skills. Let's see, translator, obviously, flight attendant, pilot, teacher, of all things, travel agent, any kind of hospitality work, social work. Imagine the flexibility you'd have if you were a bilingual in Spanish social worker in the parts of the Southeast and the Southwest. Law enforcement, where it can come in very handy. Medical professionals of all types, doctors, nurses, nurse practitioners. Human resources specialists who help people with jobs. Journalism, diplomacy, quite clearly diplomacy. Publishing, there's international publishing, right? Customer service of all sorts. Academic and scientific research. You go to conferences in Europe or in Africa, and people are going to be speaking other languages than just English. Military careers are certainly a possibility. And let's not forget spy careers. Anybody interested in the CIA or the NSA? I had a colleague who was who had been in the NSA. He was a scary guy. His purpose in the NSA had been to profile Russian and communist political leaders on the other side of the Iron Curtain to probe them for weaknesses. And he used that skill in dealing with his colleagues, and it wasn't very pleasant, right? So those are some jobs that could be used with a language very easily. In general, then, we can think about learning a foreign language to be deployed more effectively and efficiently in business, in the whole area of globalization, international relations, law, national security, personal mobility, personal and social development, and technology. There are just any number of ways a person can fit in with more than one language. And if you want to travel, of course, this is the key. So we're going to turn now to the second part of the lecture, which is how to learn a language outside of the traditional classroom. Now, I'm not knocking traditional classroom study. I've certainly participated in it. I would want you to take advantage of our French and Spanish courses here. But let's say you've taken all the Spanish you can take and you want to go on. Or maybe you had French in high school, you had it for 4 years, and you said, I want to learn Russian. I want to learn Chinese. I want to learn Swahili, right? What do? Now we're going to suggest some things that you can do to personally take charge of your language learning that don't require a formal institutional setting to do it. And what I'm going to do now is invite my colleague, Dr. Rhonda Collier, to come here and talk a little bit about the Tuskegee Global Office. The Tuskegee Global Office will help you with traveling and help you find language courses outside the university. This is very important. Dr. Collier, please.